Following today's rich discussions, it's now time to turn our attention to the power of action and focus once again on the business pledge. What better way to talk about the power of action than bringing together CEOs from around the region who are committed to good corporate governance and a sustainable future, but more importantly, who are open and willing to discuss what it means to them as leaders. I would like to call on stage Carla Koffel, Executive Director of the Pearl Initiative, to give you more details on this powerful tool that launched today, a tool that is by business for business.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my great pleasure to be able to be back in front of you to talk a little bit more about what it really means to be taking action. We've heard a lot about the need to convert an awareness about the Sustainable Development Goals by business here in the Gulf, as well as then a belief that contributing to the SDGs and sustainable development is something which is not just nice to have, but is a business imperative. We've also heard a lot about what it means to then take action and where the source and motivation to take action comes from. And listening both to the discussions that have been held on stage, as well as in a lot of my interactions with all of you during the break and during the sessions, is that this is really about leadership. This is about taking action on a personal level and also then taking action within a business. I think that was one of the key things that was shared by Arif Naqvi, is that these are separate. However, they are also aligned, and that the good corporate practices that come because people are willing to make a stand and then are able to then put the processes in place to then be able to then implement and deliver what the vision is. And that really brings us to why bother having a pledge, and why that has been a theme of then our forum today. Again, tying back into how do we turn the connections that are made in this room and the discussion that has been had in this room into something which is really tangible. So I encourage you to then consider then the reason behind the pledge, as well as what it means as business leaders going forward to commit to something like this. One of the important things to share before I invite our distinguished speakers onto the stage is that really this is something which is by golf business for golf business. You've heard about a number of pledges, a number of initiatives, which all have an important role. And one of the things which then we are looking to then have as this setting this apart is that it's something which really resonates with business here in the Gulf, and something which we, in engaging with our partners in forums like this, and as well as then engaging with our partners, is that looking at ethical and socially responsible conduct, particularly in the areas that are shared, are something which then again really resonates here in the Gulf. So it's with my great pleasure that I invite Sir Mark Moody-Stewart back to the stage, I think our hardest working speaker here today, and Dr. Tawfiq Al-Moyed also onto the stage to join in a discussion that we will hear this afternoon.
What do you want me to say?
No, please. Don't go away, Carla.
You want to
It sounds
me?
ominous.
Very good. So thank you very much, Carla, for that introduction. Is that working okay? Yes? For that introduction to the pledge. And it's very good that we have Dr. Tawfiq, who has long experience in a well-known family business, but also experience for a period in government, in running a government business on behalf of the government. If we just talk for a moment about the pledge. When I look at the pledge, and I'm sure all of you will have studied it, I hope you have, but in case you haven't, my eye lights on the four commitments that you make. One is to set targets. One is to a more inclusive workplace. The third is to promote integrity. And the fourth is to collaboration and partnership. And what strikes me about that is that the first three are things which, as business people, are actually more or less within our control. I mean, integrity, inclusive workplace, and setting targets, that we can do ourselves. The fourth target of partnerships is not completely in our control. So I think it would be useful to Dr. Taufik if you could comment a bit on your views on partnerships with, I know because we've discussed it before, that you and I both see partnerships as essential. We're not going to be able to do this on our own as business, but we need partnerships with civil society and with government. So could you say something about each of these, starting with whichever you prefer, governments or civil society?
Thank you very much. I think in order, I've been listening to the discussions this morning, and first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on the standard of discussions that we've heard and the standard of speakers. And you've actually succeeded in at least getting us to think about, and that is the more important ingredient of a successful conference. I have been thinking, and at some stages, I've noticed that we might be painting a dark picture for the younger generation of what's coming. And I think we shouldn't. I think the future is bright. And I'd like to take us back from a business angle. We are a business family for many generations. So if we just go back to 50 years ago or 60 years ago, and we examine the ingredients that we've had during those times in this region, we've had total sustainability. The pledge was exactly implemented then. There was trade, and there was no unemployment. There was no corporate governance, but there were ethical values. And now we call it something else, corporate governance. And there was commitment to each other. There was commitment to each other. Until the 30s, that has been going on for hundreds of years, until the 30s, where two things have happened in the 30s. The trade of pearls that this area was living on was threatened because Japan discovered how to cultivate pearls. And that was a really period of strong recession. Yet the sustainability continued. People continued to trade with other things. And the most successful ingredient of the success of that stage was the individual business people. And these are not the business people who were sitting behind desks. These are the business people, the farmers, the fishermen, the simple builders. And there was, like I said, total unemployment. And people looked after each other. There was no unheard of bankruptcies or whatever. If somebody is in distress, of the small ones, the society looked after him in different ways. So the main success for the hundreds of years was the small businessman. And here I would like really to use this forum today to emphasize the importance of the SMEs in this difficult time coming ahead of us. We tend to get impressed with the big businesses and the huge numbers, but these are not the ones that will see us through during this difficult time. The time has come now to look after the small businesses. It is them who are the catalysts to sustainability. And I think it is really instruments, they are the instruments for stability and success. And when it comes on a different note, when it comes to the giving the private sector, everybody talks about the private sector and giving him the responsibility of achieving sustainability. It is really not in the hands of the private sector. It used to be 60 years ago, where the private sector was motivating the business. But now, after the discovery of the oil in the past 60 years, it's the government who is the operator in the front. So, if the private sector is going to assume or be given the responsibility of sustaining sustainability, I think the government should take a back seat and really be a regulator like they claim to want to be. And I think in this dialogue that you promote, I think one has to give comfort to government to allow the private sector to assume its role and to emphasize the role, the important role of the small businesses rather than focus on the big businesses.
I think that's an excellent point, because we all know, including us big businesses, know that the bulk of employment comes from small and medium-sized enterprises. And while in the Global Compact, we think that, you know, if we have 8,000 businesses, 9,000 businesses, we're doing quite well. That's a small fraction of global businesses, and it's an infinitesimal fraction of small and medium-sized enterprises.
Right. That's right. And we are, culture-wise here, we are small businesses. It has been said this morning as well. Somebody said that the private sector contributes 60 or 70% of the GDP. But what is the private sector? The private sector are not the big institutions that you see in the newspaper. The private sector are the small family businesses. They are the contributors. And the private sector is the main employer of the workforce. So the time to slightly renegotiate the attitude and involve the private sector has come, I think. Even in, don't just bombard the private sector with the rules and regulations. I think dialogue would go a long way. And the future belongs to the audience, I think. The problems that you see today are not worse than the problems that our ancestors have seen 60 years ago, but they seem to have got over it and brought us into a better world. And we definitely enjoyed better life than our fathers and grandfathers. And I'm sure that our children are enjoying better life than what we've lived. And this could continue if you decide to shoulder the responsibility, ask the questions, and start the dialogue.
Very good. I think in a minute we should ask them to ask the questions. Just before doing that, when you talk about small businesses, if you go back in time, they had the ethics of a society. In a sense, they had transparency, because in a small community, you know what everyone's up to. And if someone is doing not very good things, the society gathers round and steers the person back on the right path. How do you, many people in civil society organizations are driven, I think, by a feeling that if they want to do something, they better get together, like-minded people, to achieve something and create a kind of small society. That's what we say. Do you have views on that?
Well,
and what are the relationships between business and those civil society organizations? Some of whom can be a big nuisance. Some of them are quite weak. Some don't have much governance, but they have very good ideas and their motivations are very strong, I think.
I think the most important aspect is for the leaders to allow, it is this tolerance of allowing smaller people to state their views and have the tolerance to listen and adapt changes if you are convinced. I think in the old days they had ethics, they had families, they had transparencies, they had all the things that are the main elements of the corporate governance as we know it today. But they were practicing it and they believed in it. They did not use corporate governance as a Chanel bag that you wear that day and claim that you have it and get certification from somebody that you do pledge it. You really have, it has to emerge from inside and you have to believe in it. And you have also to introduce accountability to those who don't. Not just introduce the corporate governance, but also what if?
Badr, one of the things that Badr said in his opening remarks was that about the pledge was, you know, we might be a bit over-pledged. And that could be true. As I understand it, part of that, which I find very exciting, is that part of the pledge would be to undertake to engage with students and let students ask questions, tell them what you're doing, and so on. So maybe we should start in practice now. Some of you students, it's time for you to do some work. Questions. Only qualification required is that you be a student of any age. Have we got any questions? Any microphones? Yes, sir. A student with grey hair like me? That's very good. Have we got a microphone?
I think it's a great opportunity that we have students around, and they have to really listen to what we've been discussing this morning. And Dr. Tawfiq just also shed more light on the fact that they must understand as students that there will be no enough government jobs for them in the future. So they have to think of what to do. And leaving it to the government, they will never kind of let go. And in these circumstances, it's a great opportunity that you have to really look at what do you do to enable the small businesses. Because the governments, especially in our part of the world today, they're cutting a lot of expenditure. The oil prices are going down, and we discussed this morning there is no assurance when this will be changed. So they will not be able to employ people as they used to do before. So it's an opportunity for all the students to look for ways and means to really get over this and plan what they want to do. They have to be responsible for their education. They have to ask questions. They have to demand people to see what are we doing, and they need to be engaged. And I think this is one of the very important message that can take from such big gathering. The second one, I think since morning, you've been talking about corporate governance. And I breathe and actually live out of corporate governance. It's not something new at all. It is just like anything that now, because of the modern world, we have to have regulation. And we name it like corruption is not something new, but now we have regulation for it. Corporate governance, I must claim, it was there from the day one Adam and Eve were actually created. And whatever religion or faith you have, but at least you know there is Adam and Eve. And God told them, this is heaven. There's a code of conduct. You do this, don't do this. And somehow they managed to eat an apple, and we all ended up to be in here. That was governance. That's part of governance. Or what we're doing now is we are formalizing it and making it written regulation. So with that, please, students, be aware of these and make yourself heard in a much louder voice than what you have been before. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any loud student voices? I agree with you, sir, that I was in Zimbabwe where the economy is collapsed, but they have an education system which is good, and listening to the students coming out of that, some of them said, which impressed me, we are not going to get a job in government, never. It wouldn't be paid anyway. We are not going to get a conventional job with a large organization. If we want a job, we have to make it ourselves. I wish that attitude was present in my own country sometimes. Another student with gray hair.
Yeah, with even more gray hair. Thank you, Dr. Al-Mahayed, for that historic perspective. I was a student 50 years ago in Europe. At the time, I think 22 states, big problems, 24 currencies, 30 languages. You had the Iron Curtain, so Eastern Europe didn't exist for us. To even travel in Europe, then in some cases, it cost a lot of, apart from currencies, visas and problems. You could not work in another country if you were a young student. Today in Europe, 28 member states, soon 27, about 220 million young people under the age of 15. My grandchildren, they can get education anywhere they like, in any language they like. They can move around, get education in one country, get a job in another one. For example, if you're from Finland or from Sweden like me, you can work in Norway or Portugal or England or France or wherever you like. You are not absolutely locked into a system by borders and religious, shall we say, restrictions. Wonderful. Now, before, we saw from the UN office and also earlier this morning at our little workshop, there are 200 million young people in the Arab world, almost the same as in the 28 countries in Europe. In other words, the 22 countries here in the Arab world, 200 million young people. They cannot get education where they want. They cannot work where they want. It has got the highest unemployment in the world. We heard this morning, over 50%, and it's particularly hitting young people and, of course, women. In Europe today, the younger generation, they look at the young generation down here and say, what chances have they got to compete with us in Europe? What chances do they have to get a job, education, set a family, move around, get the kind of freedom that young people would like? Some businessmen in Europe and some young people would openly say, this is a perfect storm. The Arab Spring, as it calls in Europe, or the Arab uprising, as it's called here, was only a little start, which turned into a disappointment for the young generation. If you have found a formula with your experience, particularly in the Gulf states, sometimes you're even ahead of Europe when it comes to education and sharing experiences. Couldn't you share that and spread it out over the other countries? Otherwise, I think we're all in big trouble. The young generation the young, desperate generation, that's really the perfect storm. Thank you.
That is a difficult question, I think. It requires a politician to answer it and not a businessman. I think there is a lot to share, not only within the Arab world, but the world as a whole is getting much closer and much smaller now. I think the young people here are much closer to the young people in Sweden than they are to their own families. Media and the IT revolution has brought the young people much closer together. And I think they should utilize technology to get even closer and learn from each other. I don't think you cannot spoon feed these matters. You can take the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I think it's now in the hands of the young people to use technology and use their own experiences from what they've seen. We are living through a world full of new experiences. Nobody can claim from the older generation that they've gone through what we are going through now. Everybody is anxious to see what's going to happen tomorrow. Nobody has the answers. And it's really for them, the young people themselves, to bridge the gaps amongst themselves and learn from each other and support each other as much as they can, so that they end up having broader opportunities irrespective of the geographical location where they are. I don't think I can answer you in a more ambiguous way than what I've done. But, I hope I did answer. But a thing that comes to my mind, and I think the younger generation should understand, is that in the past 40 years of this beautiful oil money that we've had here in the area, the prosperities and the change of style of life and the availability of everything, we've created a culture which is dependent on profit and gain, individual and collective gain. Now that culture, and we've created these big companies, and we've started to rate the companies with how much they pay back in profit. Now, as the profit begins to diminish, who's going to suffer? Do you know who's going to suffer? It's not the big companies. The ones that will suffer are the small businesses. Because as the budgets get closer, management tends to close down on small businesses. Let's cancel that. Let's cancel this cleaning contract. Let's cancel this. And maybe it would then say, let's cancel this safety aspect, this whatever. The cancellation is going to hurt all the small businesses. And I'd like to use this platform again to pledge support to the small businesses, because it's them that we should protect to ensure that sustainability is there. I would like also to say that the pledge is very honorable, and we should all support it with all our authority. And I think we should market it to the governments in order to give the private sector the tools and the instruments to be able to support it and execute it and ensure that it happens as a reality.
I think, Dr. Tawfiq, those are very wise words on which to close our session. And the advice that you are really giving us is that we should recognize the values that existed before in small businesses and look at ways in which we can build that, including in larger business, redevelop and reignite those
Values.
old values, eternal values in a way. And I think that's something, and that's a useful message for our students. It's not all electronic. There are some things which are not electronic. Thank you very much. Carla, what are we doing now?
I think we're well out of time.
Yes, okay, thank you very much.
Thank